zuwan Boko Haram a garinmu. Muna ji Boko Haram
Everybody is running for his life. There are parents that run away, leaving the children. Because they cannot carry on with them. And one thing with life is that your life first. Until after they are grown, some of them are gone to a far place.
The Church of the Brethren in Nigeria has suffered untold violence from the terrorist attacks of Boko Haram. Several 100,000 members of EYN, Ecclesia Yanuwa Nigeria, Brethren have been displaced. Thousands have been abducted or killed, including the 276 girls abducted from the Chibok school in 2014. Hundreds of church buildings and homes have been looted, burned, or destroyed. Hello, I'm Brent Carlson. Welcome to Brethren Voices. The violence has continued to occur in Nigeria, sometimes making the news here in the United States. For brethren who attempt to live the peace of Jesus, it's extremely difficult to understand these atrocities. Our guest today has heard many of the stories from the mouths of those who have lived and survived. She spent 12 years in Nigeria as a Brethren missionary, and more recently compiled stories of those who survived the attacks of the Boko Haram. Carol Mason, it's wonderful to be meeting with you again on Brethren Voices.
Oh, thank you, Brent. It's a privilege to be here.
The last time we talked, which was 2017, you had just returned from Nigeria, where you interviewed and talked to many of the survivors of the Boko Haram, and you were planning to write a book about their stories. And I understand that you have finished that book,
Yes.
and it's now been published.
Yes.
That program in August of 2017 can be seen on YouTube, Brethren Voices. And it was a story, compelling story of your going back to talk to all of these survivors. What were your thoughts about having gone and putting the book together? What was your purpose or your goal in compiling the book, which is really the stories of over 60 people who have survived the Boko Haram attacks?
It was the feeling in our denomination, within our church family, Church of the Brethren USA, EYN, Church of the Brethren in Nigeria, that we had a great deal of statistics. You know, this was after our annual conference that had the Walls of Healing, the great 8-foot banners of the 11,000 named people who were dead. We knew of the displaced people, 176,000 displaced church members. We knew the ones over in the camps that the United Nations and different governmental places had put up, and our camps that we put up to help save people that just had to run for their lives. People literally ran together. Like if your thing is attacked, and you run with your next door neighbor, two ladies running together, one is Christian, one is Muslim. So you'll see Muslim stories in here too, you know, because it's not it is a peaceful belief system of the Islamic religion, rather than the sort of the very fundamentalist type that says, Boko Haram. Haram means forbidden. Boko means a book, so any kind of book learning for anybody, any kind of public schools that Nigeria was trying to do.
So it could mean education.
Education is forbidden. So this is the very, very fundamentalist kind that won't allow their kids to go to the free public education in Nigeria. Yeah. So then it was thought, what we don't have is that individual story. And Jay Whitmire, our global mission director at that time, had just finished reading a book on the prison systems in Pennsylvania that have no parole. And he found this book of the stories of lifetime prisoners who have no chance of parole. There was this author, Zaire, had written a book saying, let's make those lifetime, on death row prisoners, their story come alive by interviewing them as real people. And Jay was so affected by this book that had photograph and personal story that brought that person to life. He thought about that format, that if we could have a book that had a photograph and where were you when the Boko Haram attacked you, just that personal, what happened to you when the Boko Haram struck, that would be so much more valuable than these great banners and these books of statistics and these facts that we are inundated with horror but not brought home the individual story. So that's what the goal was. So he sent me back out there to interview
real people,
survivors, real survivors.
And real stories.
Yeah.
One of the things that strikes me is that it's entirely different from seeing things on TV to when you meet the people and talk to the people who have survived.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you picked the people and how you were affected by their stories?
Yeah, the idea was, let's have a book of about 50 stories that does a representation of all the sorts of people who were affected, old and young, urban and rural, pastors, doctors, teachers, we had this kind of sense of let's kind of gather the stories. And then we had an idea of maybe gather the stories of type of story, like escape or miracle or lost their whole family. We didn't really know what we were getting into. And we have to, when a foreigner travels to Nigeria under these kind of really terrible situation of Boko Haram, just random thuggery and random kidnapping and random shootings, we put the EYN church officials in a great deal of stress to how to move a foreigner through that. Just by walking in with an American skin, I could have our whole car kidnapped. So I had to really trust the EYN officials to get me someplace that they considered safe, very close to the airport. I never could travel back out to Garkita where I had served, or I didn't put anybody through my personal agenda. I just said, put me where you want me. They put me by the airport and just said, listen, we'll send people to you.
How did you find people to talk to?
They just came to me. They came to me. What EYN had said, anyone who can get to her and share their story, she will record it. And that's why when I realized I was going to go way past 50, I did not pick and choose. I just absorbed every single story. I said, I will listen. And the EYN leadership made sure that all of the church districts were kind of represented so that people didn't feel like we didn't listen to some area, even though I physically could not travel to that area. They did not consider it safe at all. So they worked behind the scenes to make sure I had a representation that we had sent them of all walks of life, of anybody who is a EYN church member who's been displaced and can speak to me.
Not all these people speak the same language.
Oh, no.
So how many languages are in Nigeria, and how did you communicate?
Well, basically in this one region where I was, there were 9 mother tongues, and I would have an interpreter. If I could have an interpreter, say there's a grandmother who spoke the mother tongue of Woza, perhaps I had the granddaughter with her who could do it to Hausa, and then I'm bilingual in Hausa. So my goal was to get everything kind of into Hausa, and then I worked about 3 months writing the book, of translating all those. I recorded them in their own mother tongue, and then worked on the translations later.
So you had the audio, audio recording.
Audio recording and my written notes, yeah, and translators the best I could, yeah, and then worked on translating later, and worked with camp members to check those translations were correct, yeah. So, but I did that separate translating work later, back when I had left Nigeria. I just absorbed the whole time I was there.
How did you do that? How did you absorb the stories? Because some of them are miraculous and some are horrifying, and they're all fascinating. But the horror and the tragedy and just the suffering is overwhelming. Just in my reading, little bits and pieces, several at a time.
Yeah, you can really only read the book maybe one story a day and just pray for them and then let that go and then pick up the book another time. But I will tell you, the fact that I didn't know, I mean, I'm not a journalist, I'm just a pastor, but I had this compassionate listening ear. I felt very charged with the great responsibility of hearing a story. And during the gathering of the story, when people actually spoke to me, and I met with them from sunup to sundown, I mean, people just lined up and streamed in, and I met with them all day. And what I found was the intensity of listening and capturing the story well kept me extremely focused during that time, and then I was exhausted. I had trouble eating, I had trouble sleeping. I would just get back up and absorb again, and it really wasn't until I got home and I realized after about a week that this was no longer jet lag, that I myself was highly traumatized by what I had absorbed, that I had to seek trauma healing for myself. Trauma healing is what we did for the people in the camps. As soon as we had a camp, they had trauma healing workshops. We worked with the Mennonites too, to even get people able to relate their story. They had been there, this was their 3rd year in these camps by the time I went out to gather stories. It was really after many of, this is sort of before the stories are forgotten, but not but long enough that they were healed enough to even be able to say their stories. Yeah.
I don't want to get distracted too much, but trauma healing is a specialized treatment modality.
It is.
It's not what most people have ever experienced, because
That's right.
most people haven't gone through anything like this.
Yeah.
So, so you went through the same kind of trauma healing that many of the survivors did.
Yes, I did. And it's kind of like secondhand smoke. I mean, I recognized, I tried to shake it off a lot myself, thinking, oh, well, I haven't been through this. Mm-hmm. But I realized the very tension of going out there under such tense situations, listening to stories and hearing them firsthand and praying and weeping with so many people on the spot, many of whom I knew from my years before, or they were children of people I knew from my years before, but many I didn't even know were in EYN, all these outlying areas and places I did not serve, but still, we're all in it together. I mean, you really feel it, that I had to recognize that was trauma, and it's in your muscles and your bones, and you can't breathe really well, and we call it flat affect. You kind of just get this stunned, I couldn't make a decision, I couldn't shop, I couldn't.
So you're it's kind of similar to a shock.
It is like a shock, yeah. I couldn't resume normal life, nothing, I couldn't quite wake up, to let's go do ordinary things,
Just to highlight the power of what happened to these people, there was one story about people going back to a village that was totally destroyed. And the shock was so much that people had heart attacks. People actually died
on the spot of seeing it.
Of seeing their homes just totally destroyed. Nothing.
Yeah, and I try to think. I try to think of the other aspect. Like there's no backup. Like I know like Katrina, or we have these things where you've seen in disaster relief, and people, they were evacuated and then they go back to sea, but still they have some resources with which, or they think FEMA or something backing them up. Where this is nothing. I mean, when you go back and saw your house was burned and your church was rubble, and to get the chutzpah to get back up and do anything again is phenomenal, but to have lost everything. One of my stories is the young couple who had just been married, and so all of their brand new trousseau and household goods taken and destroyed, even though they escaped with their lives. It just takes an enormous resilience to be able to overcome that kind of a loss. And that's why there's those stories of like people just died on the spot in terms of the shock, even though they knew they had run and they knew devastation had happened, but you go back and you see it. That's when you go, it's just shocking. Yeah.
How did you begin the interviews? Were there questions you wanted to ask, or you just started with an invitation?
And basically I just asked the same question to each one, and it's helpful, like the foreword in the book really kind of helps explain about the goal of the book and how that happened. And then my introduction, you'll just see, like I just asked, where were you when the Boko Haram attacked you? And basically I didn't ask any other questions. I just let them respond to their story.
Okay.
Respond to that. And then, if I had any question, it'd just be a little question of clarity. Like, for instance, I was hearing new Hausa words that I'd never heard before, because I had never, in all my 12 years of serving in Nigeria, had never heard the Hausa word for the sound of multiple shooting gun, multiple da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They have a new Hausa word that I had never heard, and I had to go, what word is this? It's the sound of being mowed down in a congregation, the sound of that gun. Yeah.
You interviewed two young men. One is Muslim, one is Christian, and they're co-leaders in the camp.
Yeah, so...
Could you talk a little bit about them and how they're working together?
Yeah, that to me was the brilliance of the organizing of the camp, was to immediately make the leadership both, if you're going to have an interfaith camp, make the leadership both Christian and Muslim. So you have one young man's story, and he's, the imam of the Muslim people who he's their rabbi, he's like their pastor of the group that are Muslim in the camp, so that he can organize their prayers and their rituals. And it's, the first building that they built, everybody's kind of living in tents, and their first organized building was the mosque on Friday under the young imam, and it's the church on Sunday, under the Christian young man leadership, and then it is this, like trying to do some school or activities during the week, and I thought that and kind of a community center for the youth on Saturdays. I thought, what a brilliant use of if we organize ourselves to build one building. What do you think we might do? Would we build a church that's also going to be the mosque? You see? Now the camp, they try to honor each other's things. Like if a Muslim man dies, of course the Christian ladies are doing the whole funeral feast for that man who's lost his wife in the camp. Those kinds of stories of interwoven. And then the schools, of course, my big thing was to work with the Montessori preschool, choosing Maria Montessori's style, because that's trauma healing right there. It's a type of education that's trauma healing, and interfaith that does not make one religion over another religion, but works together. We work together, hand in hand, 9 mother tongues, 9 tribal things. You have to have an inter peace. So it's the Montessori School for Peace. And the goal was for the 120 preschool children who are born on their way, the mothers gave birth on their way, or in that camp, so they have no trauma of memory of their previous thing. This camp is going to be their new thing. And to me, that's the hope, if you can raise everyone together.
I was going to ask you about hope, because it sounds like just the way they're putting together these refugee camps or the resettlement camps
Yeah.
or something is bringing hope to the people.
It does. It does, in that, how can I say, it's like we have this hymn, where it's saying, we all stand equal at the foot of the cross. It just made everyone exactly back to zero. Everyone was exactly the same. Whether you'd been a doctor or whether you'd been a subsistence farmer, you are now exactly the same in the camp in terms of belongings or in terms of wealth or in terms of skills and abilities. And they look at the skills and abilities that God has given them as resources for everyone.
Mhm.
So for instance, they found 50 illiterate, in one camp they found the 50 women who were still illiterate, and they found they had 17 teachers. Well, those teachers began to rotate teaching. They said, we will not have illiteracy in our camp, that sort of thing. And you had your subsistence farmers, and you had those maybe from second generation of farmers who'd gone on to become something in the city and couldn't remember any farming skills, but everyone had to farm, and they decided that they would not have some can eat and some can't eat. Everyone would be fed in the camp. And I got the privilege of witnessing, because I go year after year after year. I had gone with our early friendship visits, and then, to visit the distribution of food and water for the camps. And then this time for the interview was the third year in the camp. And I got to see how, the bodies went from sticks and malnourishment to getting a little skin on the body, going, because they were beginning to be able to feed themselves, and watch the distribution of the wealthier churches, like from the capital cities. They would gather clothing and books and things, and how these two young men who were the leaders of the camp, one imam, one Muslim, one Christian, they worked together to make distribution piles for every single family in the camp, according to who was in that family, like a father, a mother, and child, or a mother and 5 children, or the ages of the children. They made these perfect redistribution piles for.
How many people were in?
And then they set the camp at 2,000 because the camp could go endless. But then they realized for management and feeding and organizing, they had to set a limit on a camp. So that's how we ended up with about 8 different church camps. Because
with a maximum of about 2,000 each.
With these caps on it, yeah. So phenomenal working, and that is where the hope comes. And it was my privilege to sit with those 2 young men in that third year when they asked themselves that critical question. They said, what would be different? What would we do differently if we say we're no longer in exile waiting to go home? There's a difference between temporary camp and I'm waiting to go home, to they said, what if God really wants us to live here? What if this is where we are to live? And really the creativity, things just opened up for them.
Really? I mean, a huge difference?
A huge difference. They thought up methane tanks for cooking fuel to make common kitchens. There's now like porridge to every single school child. Solar to have electricity in the camp. Everybody has a house. My big lecture series was on trees, typhoid. I wanted to make sure they understood that because they were given this barren piece of land, trees had to be planted. Typhoid is going to be endemic, epidemics in a camp. And the third T was trash, because everybody has the habit of there's somewhere to do the trash. Well, in a camp, there's nowhere to do the trash. You can't just burn it. 2,000 people are going to be breathing that in, you have to so anyway, it's things like that. And the creativity just took off in terms of how are we going to care for each other.
Wow. I'm just...
And there's schooling for all the kids.
Just thinking about the difference between waiting to go back and this is it, let's begin where we are.
And they did try to go back. They're farmers. And when they heard that maybe the Boko Haram had left that area, they really wanted to go home. We're talking just the farmers now who wanted to go home and put in the crops for the season. But the Boko Haram mowed them down when they came back. So, see, they left kind of like, somehow the Boko Haram army works that, if you take over a little village, you get to be the warlord there. And then you get to snatch some woman to be your wife. And that's how they kind of settle these areas. And they claim them. They say, now we own this area. It's no longer, it's no longer a free village in a democratic Nigeria. It is my little fiefdom.
Are there any plans or hopes for reconciling with the Boko Haram? I mean, is it just...
I don't know.
impossible?
I wonder with this, the same kind of Afghanistan Taliban kind of question of like, because now they have an entire Islamic government now in Nigeria, which was why there was a little bit of a blind eye to this whole Boko Haram thing in terms of the government, but also whether they're now going to negotiate with them. I have no clue how it's going to go, but I really fear for the democracy. Like when the Boko Haram tried to attack, blow up bus stations within the capital city of Abuja. And Abuja is carefully planned capital city. It's not north, it's not south. It was trying to break that pattern of the history of Islamic north, animist Christian south. It was trying to centralize things, put two-party system all over, break the patterns of civilian military coups, and try to have a real democracy with everyone represented. And when they tried to bomb the bus systems there, so many young people poured out into the streets of Abuja and said, we are a 21st century democracy. This is not an Islamic Christian question. This is not, this is pure thuggery and it's murder and you've got to stop it. We will not tolerate this. We are modern democratic people. That was their basis of their protests.
Carol Mason, thank you so much for sharing with you. It's a difficult thing to comprehend, and you have explained it so well, and we cherish the stories and just feel for the people who are struggling to deal with their lives and find hope for the future. So thank you for being with us on Brethren Voices.
It's a great privilege. Thank you, Brent. Yeah.
On this International Day of Peace, this is Brent Carlson.
And Carol Mason.
Wishing you and the world.
And the world.
Peace.